Good morning and welcome to today's 20-minute update, BCF's monthly series of interactive calls and Facebook live streams to give you an inside look at BCF, our initiatives, and the work we do in Baltimore City, Baltimore County, and the entire region. Thank you for joining us. I'm Erica Seth Davies with BCF, and joining me today is Kevin Griffin Moreno, BCF's Director of Community Investment. Good morning, Kevin.
Good morning, Eric.
Before we get started, I do want to thank our Civic Leadership Fund donors for their support. It's because of you that BCF can provide resources like the 20-minute update. So let's get started. Today, we are talking about education advocacy. So, education was a big issue that was front of mind for Baltimore City in this most recent Maryland legislative session. So, how did the city fare by the end of the session, Kevin?
It fared better by the end of the session than it was looking at the beginning of the session. When the 90-day General Assembly session started in Annapolis in January of this year, the city was facing a $130 million deficit and looking to potentially have to lay off up to 1,000 employees. Um, Thankfully, the city and the state came together with a joint funding package. The governor introduced the supplemental budget, and the worst parts of that drastic scenario were forestalled, where city schools received $60 million over 3 years for a total of $180 million from city and state sources.
Okay. That's a really big number. So let's take a few steps back. Can you talk about the nature of this structural deficit that BCPS found itself in?
Sure. I guess I'd like to start by addressing a myth that's frequently articulated when talking about this issue, and that that is that the deficit is a result of mismanagement.
Hmm.
Now, look, city schools is a huge bureaucracy. Any huge bureaucracy is going to, be on a continuous improvement cycle,
Right.
shall we
Have its
say,
inefficiencies.
right,
Got it. Got it.
in terms of its budget efficiency. But what we're really looking at in terms of the sources of the deficit are three factors. So city schools gets state funding based on, first of all, what its enrollment size is.
Hmm.
Now, we had up to 85,000 students just a couple of years ago. We're now down to 82. We're projected to go down another 1,000 this year.
Okay.
So we have declining enrollment. Declining enrollment means less state money coming in. The second source is jurisdictional wealth. So there's a formula that the state uses to calculate how wealthy a jurisdiction is. And essentially, the more wealth, the less money.
Okay.
Now, Baltimore's picture is complicated because while we do benefit from increasing wealth in certain pockets of the city, we also have increasing needs in other parts. So that formula doesn't really work for the city,
Hmm.
and for other jurisdictions as well. And then the third factor is inflation. Costs go up, inflation rises. Pre the 2009 2008 recession, there was an inflation factor that adjusted the amount of state money coming in upward as went up. That factor was taken out a few years ago because of the recession, and as a result, we've had to rely on supplemental budgets coming in from whoever's in the governor's chair.
Okay. So what are the proposals to start to address this? Can you talk a little bit about the Kerwin Commission and
Sure.
how that might address funding moving forward?
Certainly. So the currently the uh, amount of state money that goes to local jurisdictions for public education is governed by a policy known as Thornton. Thornton came about oh gosh, over a dozen years ago now, and it was the product of the Thornton Commission. Well, now we have a new commission whose charge it is to examine the current funding formula, find out the places where it's broken, and recommend fixes. That commission is chaired by Britt Kerwin, hence the Kerwin Commission, and they've been working for months now on different recommendations, working with consultants, and they have a series of recommendations, a proposal report that they have to submit to the Maryland General Assembly in December of this year. So 2018 is going to be a Kerwin year.
Okay. Got it. So, um, in addition to some of those other issues that you talked about and some of the perceptions of Baltimore City, we do actually know that Baltimore City receives more funding per pupil than other districts. And as you mentioned, has experienced declining enrollment. So, why does BCPS actually need more money at this stage?
There are a number of drivers of the budget and the cost of education in Baltimore. I'm going to highlight a couple. Uh, First of all, the city has a higher concentration and more students who have needs associated with poverty, with disability, with other special needs, and it costs more to educate those children. Um, the second factor that I'd point to is a few years ago, city schools advocates, including Baltimore Community Foundation, but a whole bunch of people were involved in a successful proposal to leverage millions upon millions of dollars in school construction funds.
Hmm.
So funds to renovate uh, schools with ailing, aged architecture, as well as consolidation and other bricks and mortar projects. So we're committed to that, and that's a good thing.
Okay.
But it it that's part of what we're paying for
Got it.
now,
Just
and
cost.
two of the reasons why city schools cost more than other jurisdictions.
Okay. Now, will this proposed funding take charter schools into account? I know a lot of people are probably wondering about that,
Yes.
where they stand.
Yeah. The short answer is yes, it will. How it will remains an open question. We haven't seen what the preliminary recommendations from the Kerwin Commission look like at the moment, particularly where charters are concerned. But I think charter schools in Baltimore City, public charters, are concerned with the same things that traditional schools are,
Hmm.
which is how much funding is adequate to provide an education, good education, to its students. Now, with charters in Baltimore, there are some nuances because of the relationship they have with the city and some of the fees that come out of their state funding for particular services, and that's going to be an ongoing conversation. But at heart, charters are going to be looking for the same thing that everybody else is.
Got it. Okay. So while we know that these recommendations won't be actionable until the 2018 legislative session, what can we do now to ensure success? I think we've seen a lot of activity in the city and a lot of support and interest in funding for public education. I think even I've seen kids out protesting families. So this is an issue that's really moving the citizens of Baltimore. So
It's
what
really
are some
true.
things that people can do?
It's been really extraordinary. Debates over the adequacy of education funding come up perennially
Hmm.
in Baltimore and across the state, but I have never seen this level of mobilization and
Okay.
interest around this issue. So the very first thing, the most important thing that BCF would recommend to anybody interested in this issue is to really get the facts. And I think a good starting point is the website that Baltimore City Public Schools uh, created to explain how the school budget works and to dispel some of the myths going around about where the money has come from and where it goes. And that website is engage.baltimorecityschools.org. Baltimore City Schools is all spelled out. Engage.baltimorecityschools.org. That's a good starting point
Hmm.
to get a grounding in how the budget system works. Then the next step is to actually become involved. And Baltimore Community Foundation is proud to give grant funding and other types of support to some really stellar nonprofit organizations that conduct education advocacy as part of their daily work. This is what they live and breathe. Those include ACLU Maryland
Hmm.
chapter, Baltimore Education Coalition, Advocates for Children and Youth, Maryland Family Network. There are some others. Um, Baltimore Education Coalition, I think, provides the best vehicle for people to become engaged at whatever level their interest takes them.
Okay.
They comprise parents, teachers, advocates, kids, um, people from nonprofit organizations, community residents, faith communities, who are all concerned with the adequacy of schools funding and the quality of education. So, start off with a city schools website, contact Baltimore Education Coalition,
Okay.
and go from there. And also stay tuned to BCF's own advocacy communications.
Okay.
We're going to be sending out a lot of messages in the coming weeks and months as the 2018 session approaches about what folks connected to us can do to advance this issue.
Okay, that's right. So keep a lookout for BCF's advocacy alerts. So I think now we're going to open the call to questions. So if you dialed into our call today, you can press um, *6 now to unmute yourself and ask a question. After you finish asking the question, press *6, sorry, to mute your line. If you are following our live stream on Facebook, simply ask a question in the comments of the video, or you can tweet a question using the hashtag 20-minute update. So again, if you've dialed in, press *6 now to unmute yourself and ask a question.
While we're waiting for the first question, I just wanted to briefly pull back from the funding topic and highlight another issue that BCF worked on in partnership with Central Scholarship Bureau
Mhm.
that we're really excited about. So there was legislation that was signed by the governor to limit the extent to which colleges and universities can practice what is called scholarship award displacement.
Okay.
So, in a nutshell, that's when college or university gives you as a prospective student some institutional financial aid
Mhm.
as an inducement to come to their school, but then as you get more scholarship money and other types of financial aid, that amount, their institutional aid is reduced, and that can have disproportionately negative effects for
Right.
first generation college students, or people coming from lower income backgrounds. So Central Scholarship Bureau led the charge, and BCF supported them for the past couple of years, and I'm very pleased to say that legislation passed this year.
That's tremendous,
Yeah,
actually. I'm sure some of our scholarship donors are really happy about that as well, instead
and
of
we had
directly.
them in mind when we were out there in Annapolis.
Absolutely,
Yeah,
I'm sure, as well as students and families. So that
for
is a
sure.
huge win. I guess we are really pushing on education from all levels. Do we have any questions from Facebook? Not yet? Okay. As with everything at BCF, we always bring a racial equity lens into this work. Can you talk a little bit about how the Kerwin Commission, or how this is going to affect students of color potentially? So knowing that, I mean, well over 60% of students in the state of Maryland are students of color, and in Baltimore City, it's well over 95%. Is that being taken into consideration as well in any way in this
It's a
work?
good question. I think the answer is that it's up to us, those of us who are in the community, to ensure that whatever policies are developed by the Kerwin Commission, whatever recommendations come before the General Assembly, do take racial equity into account as a factor in making policy decisions. Um, I, there are a lot of people of goodwill who are very smart working on this issue,
Hmm.
but too often the issue of disparities that break down along lines of race get left out of these public policy debates. So it's up to us, everybody watching, listening, working alongside us to make sure that issue does not get pushed from the table.
Okay. So before we check back to the Facebook live stream, were there any other? I know we're talking about education advocacy, but did we have any other wins or other issues that BCF was focused on at this past legislative session?
We did provide support for a measure that actually passed as well. It creates a commission to study the adequacy of funding and education for pre-kindergartners,
Hmm.
and BCF is very engaged in the quality and accessibility of early childhood education, and we pursue this through our public policy advocacy, but also through working with public and private partners, including our donors, to create Judy centers, early childhood resource centers. So anything that comes up about that has to do with early childhood funding, we are very interested. So we supported this measure in the last General Assembly session. In previous updates, we've talked about our initiative, Central Maryland Transportation Alliance,
That's right.
which had a very active and a very successful year working for more responsible transportation planning and funding. So we stood alongside them on those issues as well.
Okay. So we do have a question that's just come in from Twitter. Are there any opportunities to improve enrollment in city schools to improve funding levels? It's a great question.
It is a great question. I will be upfront and say that that's a bit above my pay grade, simply because it has to do not just with the availability and adequacy of uh, school-based education, but a whole host of factors: economic development,
Hmm.
housing policy, neighborhood policy. Um, I will say that. Um, it is one of the reasons that BCF has focused over the past 5, 6 years and more, not just on education, but on neighborhoods.
Right.
Neighborhoods are our other big priority area for discretionary funding, partly because of this understanding that good neighborhoods are, are ones that support families that send their kids to good schools.
Okay.
And so the, the fate of both education and neighborhoods is intertwined.
So true. Do we have any other questions? So, what else is going on in our community investment department these days?
Well, we are currently moving through our quarterly grant cycles, and a lot of them actually, apropos of this conversation about advocacy, a lot of them have to do, particularly in our education uh, program area,
Hmm.
have to do with advocacy. BCF is distinct among philanthropies in that not only can we conduct direct advocacy through lobbying and through grassroots mobilizing and so forth, but we can also fund lobbying efforts and other public policy efforts. So I mentioned a couple of the organizations that we support um, earlier in the conversation, but they are by providing funding to these advocacy organizations,
Hmm.
that is we found to be a very successful way of leveraging the impact of our grant dollars and leveraging the impact of the donations given to us by donors to the civic leadership.
Okay, great. So the grant making initiatives, advocacy, we've pretty much covered all of it. So we're coming up on 9:20 here, which means that this 20-minute update is coming to an end. Thank you again to our Civic Leadership Fund donors for making all of this possible, and we'd like to thank all of you on the line today and those who have sent questions for taking the time to learn about education funding at BCF. This was our fifth 20-minute update of 2017, and we will be back next month on June 20th at 9 a.m. for our next conversation. You can also visit bcf.org to sign up for BCF e-news. Again, thank you all. Thank you, Kevin,
Thank you, Erica.
and have a great day and a happy new year.